All right. So module 3. So what we're doing is we are working our way around the horn. We got part 1. Module 1 was strategy. Module 2, which was pre-recorded on strategic leadership. And now we're into module 3, the external analysis. So when you do Lowe's and when you do your group, and I need for you to go back, look at the assignments and start thinking about, are there any folks in the class that you want to work with, and a priority, but we'll talk more about that Wednesday in terms of the brands that might be of interest to you. So here's we are today, 3, and then of course Wednesday we'll get into 4. Here's another way of looking at it. So today we're doing the external environment, and the result of that will be the identification of opportunities and threats for your brand based upon what you find in the external world. And then you start looking in the internal world, and then you're going to identify your strengths and weaknesses from that. And you come up with your dilemmas and opportunities, which is where you need to focus as a brand. So right now, if you think about Apple, if you think about anybody's making smartphones, car, semiconductor chips are in short supply. For those of you who are in supply chain, you've probably been talking about that in your classes. What a great time to study supply chain. Supply chains are in havoc just about in every industry. But you'll come up with what the big dilemmas / opportunities are, and then you'll build your vision and strategies from there. So the next 2 days are all about right here and taking a look at the research and where you need to go with it. So I want to reinforce this notion of a SWOT assessment: strength, weakness, threat, opportunity. And we're talking about the external today. So that is all the forces, the inflection points, the craziness that's happened in the external world. How is it affecting you in terms of threats and or opportunities? So as tragic as COVID has been, and it has been tragic, and I'm sure that there are, and you may have even had to deal with it personally, your family members. My brother lost his wife to it last October. It's been tragic, yet there are brands that have seized that as an opportunity and are driving growth, much as our 20th anniversary of 9/11. If you think about the tragedy of 2,996 people perishing in that terrible event, if you were in the security consulting industry, it ended up being an opportunity. If you were building and distributing, selling security video cameras, it was a opportunity. Back in my UCROP days, we felt we needed to provide better security. We didn't have outside cameras, and to outfit every store outside, it would be about $100,000. Don't know what it'd be now, but that's what it was back in 9/11 days. So today we're talking about potential threats and opportunities. Wednesday we'll talk about strengths and weaknesses. And of course, this is, without saying, coronavirus. Now we're into Delta, and then now we got this new thing going on. Interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal just talked about where will we be when we start thinking about the future of coronavirus. And what the early research is showing, looking out, that this thing ain't going away. It probably won't stay in its current form where, it's sending a lot of people to the hospital, but it will operate more as the current seasonal colds do and the seasonal flu will for us. What was interesting is that many researchers don't know where the cold came from, but it probably represented some virus decade or centuries ago that just morphed into this annual thing that we're dealing with. So when we start thinking about coronavirus, then we from a strategy standpoint look at phase 4. We're trying to figure out what is the industry dynamics going to look like. And of course, back in March of 2020, we were all waiting for the impact. And so the impact came in, we were withstanding the impact. June of 2020, we started to return to some level of normalcy. Then boom, phase 2 came in, or wave 2. We started going back to normalcy, boom, then wave 3 came in. And then we were all getting fired up and going out to dinner and everything. And now 4 has come in, and you know, and everybody's making personal decisions around it. I myself had gone out and started to enjoy dinner and being around, but now I got a new little grandbaby that's 30 days old. Even though he may have some immunity from his mom, my daughter, I'm not taking any chances. So I've been masking back up, and I want to see him. And the last thing I want to do is carry the virus to that little guy or his big brother who's 3.5. So phase 4, it requires strategic thinking. If you go back to the strategic leadership video that I, of course, pre-recorded and posted out on my YouTube channel, you know, strategic leadership is about anticipation, guys. So I was at a board meeting last week up in Boston for a supermarket, and the number one, there's 2 challenges. Obviously, supply chain is one, and they told me that if there's any type of panic buying over the next 30 days, supply chains in the supermarket industry are going to break down. I'm not just talking about toilet paper and wipes. I'm talking about a lot of different categories, you know, that you normally would find in a supermarket. So sorting through supply chain is a big issue, but that's 12 to 24 months, you know, if not sooner. So that's about weathering what's going on, letting your suppliers fill back up. And then, but the big thing is, what will we do as consumers in terms of ordering, pickup, delivery, and that sort of thing? So this notion of micro fulfillment centers is taking hold, and every regional supermarket has to figure out, what are they going to do about that? Are they going to build a micro fulfillment center to handle online shopping, and then you contract with Instacart or DoorDash or Shipt or whoever, who would simply deliver the product from this micro fulfillment center? Or do you take 15, 20,000 square foot of space out of your store and do you build a fulfillment center right there? So we think about Wegmans for a second. We know that they had pubs on either the right side or left side, depending upon, you know, what they choose to do in a particular market. The store here is on the right side, not far from where I sit, but it's 15, 20,000 square foot of space. And Wegmans has got to decide, are they going to repurpose that and turn it into something else? Because it's essentially dead space right now. I mean, you as a customer can go over there, you can sit, you can eat, etc. But in my trips to Wegmans, nobody's going over there. So what's Wegmans going to do? And this is what we call a strategic dilemma. Wegmans has got to figure out what to do. Probably it's about a $2 million, $3 million, maybe more dollar investment to work a fulfillment center into each one of those stores. And they're well over 100 stores. I don't know how many they are right now. So that is the example of a dilemma. Somebody might say, well, it's an opportunity for them from a delivery standpoint. And yeah, I kind of got it. But the reality is they wouldn't be focused on this had the virus not come in and upset the industry the way it has. Sorting out new industry. What's higher ed going to do? You know, my MBA students were supposed to be in class, and then it turned into a high flex, and my MBA students don't want to come into class. Now we're all remote. I happen to have done my 2 o'clock class in the business school today. That's the most students and colleagues, faculty I've seen there in over a year and a half. So, but what are we going to do as higher ed? What's the supermarket industry going to do? What's the automobile industry going to do? What's the cruise industry going to do? What's the airline industry going to do? And so all these things have got to be sorted out. So when we're talking about doing an external analysis, again, you're focused on threats and or opportunities. And threats have the potential to capsize the brand. So you got to either just head right into them and confront them and deal with them, or sidestep them. When Walmart decided to be the nation's largest food retailer by year 2000, they decided to bring in 7 supercenters into the Richmond market. And that wasn't an opportunity, guys. I mean, that was a threat. And so we had to decide how to respond. And what we needed to do is find out what the stores were going to look like, what kind of SKUs or products were they going to have in the stores. Were they going to have produce? Were they going to have meat? Were they going to have seafood? Were they going to have bakery? What were they going to bring in? And so, we had to do our best to scan the future, and by that meaning looking at other industry disruptions, not only Walmart, but anything else that might have a negative effect. So supply chain for us at that time wasn't a big issue, but it is now. And supply chain in the automobile industry is huge right now, with semiconductor chips being in such short supply. So you're looking at, you're trying to forecast trends. You're looking at economic data such as GDP, unemployment, inflation. You're looking at what your rivals are doing in that regard. You're looking at other external forces on the industry, and you're assessing what the impact will be. In module 2, I talked about scenario planning, and that in essence is scenario planning. Okay, if I am in the convenience store industry with gas pumps, of course, attached, what will the electrification of automobile as a force, what will it mean for me as a business person? Think about it for a second. The way it shapes right now is General Motors has said they're going to be fully electric by 2035. That's 14 years from now. And so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you just going to close? If you're a convenience store, what are you going to do if you're Wawa? What are you going to do if you're Sheetz? Do they just put in the charging stations? Well, right now, those things are really expensive and they take a long time. So are you going to pull into Wawa and hang out for 2 hours or an hour? I don't know exactly how long it takes. I don't have a electric car, but what are you going to do? So if you're going to stop and wait and take a break, if you're traveling down to Florida, Wawa or Sheetz has got to make it compelling for you to just hang out. So now maybe do they put in a cafe area with the internet and make it almost like a waiting area for you of sorts? And you think, oh my God, what do you do? Not only that, is how much profit do the gas pumps bring for Wawa and Sheetz? I don't know, right? But and they're both private, so maybe it's out there. But so the other issue is maybe you try to figure out how can we just be profitable by what's inside our stores. Well, if you look at a lot of the stores out there, they don't have much inside. Let's go to 7-Eleven. There's a lot of standalone 7-Elevens that make a living. They're profitable. Just the one by the business school, it doesn't have gas, so it's profitable without the gas. So every one of those stores that do have pumps, 7-Eleven's got to figure out, all right, what are we going to do? Are we going to wipe them out, take them out, and then just load up as much food in those stores as we can? So those are the scenarios, and they have to figure out whether it's electrification of automobiles. If you're State Farm or Progressive or Geico, what are you going to do when cars go fully autonomous? These are all issues that have to be considered and explored. 14 years is a long way out, 2035 for General Motors, but Volkswagen said they're going to do it before that. So you've really got to have a game plan, I think, guys, within 5 years. You've really got to have an impact. And this is probably going to take a lot of capital for convenience stores to figure out. So how do you collect the data? You do it through observation. For Lowe's, that's your project. I highly encourage you to go into a Lowe's and just pick up a shopping cart, get it, just plan on buying a couple things and experience Lowe's as a consumer, and along the way, ask one of the associates in the store, hey, where's the light bulbs? Or, hey, where can I get a hammer? Maybe even approach one and just say you're a VCU student doing a project on Lowe's, and what are the biggest issues that they're worrying about? Or even if you want to get bold, ask them what's it like to work there. That's the internal, right? But the external would be, what are the biggest external issues that you guys are dealing with right now? So that could be your observation. Primary research is you're out there, you're doing focus groups, you're doing interviews, you're doing an online survey using SurveyMonkey, you're creating perceptions. Do you shop at Lowe's? Yes or no? If you don't, where do you shop? Why don't you go into Lowe's? If you do go into Lowe's over Home Depot, why? When you think of Lowe's, what one or two adjectives come to mind? That's a brand question, right? That's a brand positioning question. And then secondary research, of course, is using all of our wonderful databases. So for your Lowe's project and your group project, you're going to be using all of this to the best of your ability to talk to me about what are the big dilemmas and opportunities for Lowe's, and then you got to build a strategy on how to address them. So the industry environment, competitive rivalry. It is like playing football or basketball. You got offensive and defensive moves. Walmart says they're going to be the nation's largest food retailer by year 2000. They bring 7 supercenters to Richmond. I'm kind of sitting on my desk one day reading the industry magazine that's telling me that, and I'm thinking, what do I do? What do we do? And we decided to go to the street, borrow $100 million, upgrade our stores, build new stores. We were going to dig a deeper moat. We were going to try to create a better competitive advantage. People said, don't worry about Walmart. It's not the same customer as you. To a certain degree, they were right. But guess what? If I had a family of 5 kids, 4 kids, 3 kids, I'm going through 2 tubs of Tide a week. And I can buy it $2 cheaper at Walmart than Ukrops or wherever. Maybe I'm just going to go into that Walmart and get some Tide. And then, oh, by the way, while I was in there, I'm going to get Pampers, I'm going to get Bounty. And so what happened, even when they came to town, it's a different customer, but yet a lot of our customers went in there to get those centers, what we call the grocery or the center store items. So it's offensive, defense. Nike and Adidas are going at it. Coke and Pepsi hate each other's guts. Uber and Lyft. You're not hearing much about Lyft delivery. Lyft Eats, like Uber Eats. I mean, Uber Eats performance was better than the ride sharing program during COVID. Be interesting to see their third quarter numbers, how they're doing this year. But that was a reality. The Burger King, Big Mac, and then you have all the other rivals in that space, and Amazon and Walmart hate each other's guts as well. So the intensity of rivalry that I'll talk about later on is, if you're going to jump into a space like when Lululemon decided to go in and take on Nike and Adidas, what was that like? Or Under Armour, when Under Armour decided to jump in. So all of a sudden, Nike, iconic brand, is being attacked. And then, of course, you got Puma out there as well. So it's a fairly crowded space. You have a lot of other smaller new entrants that are squeezing their way in. And Coke and Pepsi have almost had a duopoly, to be honest with you. And other new entrants into this space were cut off from distribution because of these guys. So those very special brands, that have made it. So when you go into that aisle and you have smaller Northern Neck ginger ale, for example, and I think they went out of business, but I'm not sure. Tough to get in there. So what's the level of competitive rivalry going up? So you look at the industry. So I want you to be thinking about this in terms of Lowe's. And then we'll deal with who's on your team and what your priority of brands will be I'm going to have you Wednesday after class start emailing me so I can form your groups. But industry, you're looking at who are the incumbents and who are the new entrants brands. I mean, Harry's, Dollar Shave Club, those were new entrants into this men's grooming space. And then Target came out with Goodfellow and Company. They've entered into that space very aggressively. So in many respects, Target is selling, of course, Harry's as well as the Procter and Gamble products, etc. But Target's also got their own private brand, Goodfellow and Company, which we'll talk about later on in the semester. Very similar suppliers and buyers, similar products and services, maybe not always identical, and similar forces and disruptions. So when we did our private brand for mayonnaise, Duke's, I don't know what you like, but Duke's was hugely popular in the Richmond marketplace. So we called our private brand company and we say, hey guys, it was a company called Topco, Skokie, Illinois. We said, okay, get your scientists together. We want you to get as close to Duke's mayonnaise for our private label brand, Ukrops, without getting us sued. And that's the way it works. My son-in-law used to work for Health Warrior. It had a chia bar. Trader Joe's called them up, wanted them to come in and present their product. But of course, what we know is Trader Joe's does not have a lot of national brands. All they wanted to do was to get the pitch and to learn about the product. And of course, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it was later, they came out with their own version. And that's the way it is. I mean, that's Trader Joe's. That's the way they do business. I'm not saying it's unethical or anything like that. It's just the way who they are. And then your industry analysis, it's really a method to identify the profit potential. You're trying to understand implications for a firm's strategic position. So we'll talk about Burger Batch in a second, who entered into the Richmond marketplace, New Zealand inspired brand. You got all these other burger brands in. They decided to position themselves in a very different way. Same with Boulevard Burger and Brew. So how are you gonna position? What's the structure, and then what's the investment potential? On the right side here, you see, so this is an industry, and what a group of researchers wanted to find out is, okay, what are the contributing factors towards firms' performance? Because if they're all dealing with COVID, and they look at the balance sheet at the end of the year, why is one firm still more profitable or performing higher at another level? So what the study found was the industry effects accounts for 20% of performance. Other effects, whatever they might be, account for 25% of performance. So this could be a list of 20, 30 items, perhaps even depending upon where you're located in the United States. I mean, if you're going through extreme weather conditions right now, if you're in Louisiana and you're dealing with one hurricane after another, that's another, cycle effect that sometimes explained, sometimes unexplained. But here's the big one. Up to 55% of a firm's brand's performance is due to what we call firm effects. Firm effects is strategic leadership. Firm effects is how leaders think strategically. Firm effects is the culture of the organization. So if you think Chick-fil-A and you compare Chick-fil-A to Popeyes, you compare Chick-fil-A's to KFC, you compare Chick-fil-A to others, they drive huge revenue through each one of their units, more so even than all their other non-chicken competition in fast food industry. And a big reason why they perform better is their brand, it's their strategic leadership, it's the culture of their business. The fact that they have operational excellence around speed and productivity, their friendliness, they're fast, they're friendly, they got great consistent food. So this is why leadership is so critical. And leadership is the reason, or lack thereof, Circuit City blew up. Lack of senior strategic leadership is the reason Blockbuster blew up. Borders Books blew up. At the end of the day, the leadership at the top, if it's operating at a high level from a strategic and execution standpoint, it's going to outperform its competition. At least that's what the research shows. And I believe that. So you want to try to figure out, is the industry growing or dying, you know? And so how does growth affect intensity of rivalry? And what the research also showed was, if you have an industry that's going through high growth, it's based in part to consumer demand rising. And so consumers are just out there buying a lot. And so everybody's getting the business. Why mess with a good thing? We're not going to start a pricing war. And so let's all try to get the margin we can to be successful. It's not collusion. It's just the fact that if I'm rival A and you're rival B, you know, why fight it out right now? There's more business for both of us to go around. However, if we're in negative growth and I'm A and you're B, and we're both in either a flat market or a negative market, then we're both taking our swords out and we're both going at it. And so rivalry will be fierce, it will be bloody, it will be oftentimes price driven. But you also got to innovate, you got to remain compelling, you got to keep your moat wide and deep. And so growth of an industry can have an effect on how the brands coexist. So here is this notion of industry versus firm effects. For industry effects, these are driving forces. So if you were in the furniture industry in 2020, you're not only dealing with tariffs, given goods coming in, fabricated coming in from China, but you're also dealing with COVID. So, and all furniture companies had to deal with that across the United States, tariffs and COVID. Well, some of those furniture design houses did very well and others went out of business. And the reality is, firm effects describes why one brand does really well and why another brand doesn't. So firm effects is about the actions managers take to respond to driving forces. And the firm effect plays a huge role in brand performance because it speaks to the leadership, strength of leadership, and their ability to anticipate, plan, and execute. So when you're interviewing, a good question to ask is talk about training. How much training occurs within the organization? And the training can not only be the training for your job, but the training of leadership. So I've got a client who every fall he asked me to put on a introductory, like an emerging leaders leadership program for 10 of his new or emerging leaders, because he and these are all, this is a brand, we'll tell you who it is, but it's a brand that you know, if you graduate from college, he's going to put you into this class, and then you and I would spend 4 weeks together going through intense training together. So if we look at industry structure, you got monopoly, and just think for yourself here in the Richmond area, pretty much only got one company that operates as a monopoly, and think about it, and of course it's Dominion Energy. And you have some smaller cooperatives located, scattered around. One's in the Shenandoah Valley. I pitched them for a project once, but didn't get it. But pretty much Dominion is calling the shot. Interesting thing, when you operate as a monopoly, you're not hungry, you're not hustling, you're not trying to outrun the grizzly bear of sorts. And so when Tesla came out and they started their brand, they had to build their own recharging stations. So if I were to ask you, all right, who comes to mind when you think about electrification of homes? You think Dominion. If I were to ask you, how about the electrification of automobiles? You think Tesla. Well, what's the difference between building a charging station that sends electricity to a car versus electricity that's sent to the home? There's a difference, but yet the distributor of that should be able to handle both. And Dominion did not do that, and they're playing catch up right now. So that's a monopoly. On oligopoly, oligopoly is where you got three players. Sometimes you hear the word duopoly, two players. So Coke and Pepsi, it's a duopoly of sorts. And if you think about the big beer companies, it's kind of an oligopoly. And so you look at monopolistic and perfect competition. So if you're thinking of starting up a company, a brand, where is the best competition? So obviously, if you're here, these guys are going to do everything they can do to keep you out without getting sued by the federal government. Here, you can jump in, but you have to be very differentiated. We'll talk more about differentiated as we get into chapter 6. You got to be really, really good and unique and different. And in terms of the word perfect competition, if you're operating here, you might not see it perfect. You probably ain't sleeping at night because you're constantly worrying about your competitors and what they're doing. But oftentimes you'll hear we've become a commodity product. And so when you have a commodity product, oftentimes there's very low barrier entry, so companies can jump in very easily. And oftentimes the people that are coming in, or the brands that are coming in, figure out how to do it really cheaply. So they're coming in as a low priced alternative. Or it could be just the opposite, where they have a highly differentiated, just like over here, way of doing it. But oftentimes price becomes the key driver. And when price is a key driver for selling the product, it's not fun, because all you're trying to do is offer a cheaper proposal to the potential buyer. So, but this is a way of looking at the landscape when you think about it. So if you think about um, um, the Lowe's industry, where would you put it? Obviously not monopoly, but would you put it here, or would you put it here, or would you put it there? And that's one of the things I want you to figure out as you study Lowe's. So if we think about airline industry, and we have this term called strategic route map. Strategic route map could be a lot around geography. In terms of airline industry, you have Delta, United, and American being the big three. I would almost say that we could maybe argue to put Southwest up there, because Southwest's geographic reach has gotten so much better since they acquired AirTran, and then opening up other gates really since 2010. So for the past 10, 11 years or so, they've almost earned the right to get in here. And I think Southwest is actually, before COVID, was driving more passengers than any other airline. My brand of choice is JetBlue. I take it direct to Boston. I'm going to use the word Blue Ocean. You're not going to have to worry about that till chapter 6. But a blue ocean is where it's affordable and differentiated at the same time. So one of the things I love about JetBlue, it's direct, it's cheaper. As long as I have my headphones, I can watch TV, or some direct TV or whatever that's playing on their little TVs for every seat. And so then you have Frontier, Spirit, and Alaska as well. So those are considered to be low cost point to point, and the other are differentiated hub and spoke. So, again, is Southwest differentiated? And they're a low cost airline, but it's quirky, it's fun, they tell jokes, service is pretty good. So Part of me feels that Southwest might even be operating in a space unto itself, but that's just me. Let's look at the burger wars in Richmond. My goodness gracious, it's competitive. Um, so you look at the rivals at the top, Hardee's. Be thinking about you too. If tonight after class, now we're talking about, you go, God, Professor Kelly was talking about hamburgers. I gotta eat a hamburger. Where would you go and why? So would you go to Hardee's? You're not going to go to Carl's Jr. unless, of course, you're in the West Coast or Midwest. Would you go to Burger King? Would you go to Sonic? Would you go to Dairy Queen? Would you go to McDonald's or Wendy's? Cookout? Cookout is what I consider to be a blue ocean brand as well. It's very affordable, almost cheap, with a lot of selection, very convenient, and the product's pretty good. Would you go to the newest entrant in the burger industry here in town, Habit? Habit is a sub brand of Yum Brands, which owns KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. They decided to diversify and get into the burger space. Habit is nowhere near as big as their other three sister brands. Yum Brands is what's considered to be a house of brands. And so House of Brands, meaning that I don't even know if you knew Habit was owned by Yum or KFC was owned by Yum or Taco Bell, whoever. And so Habit is the newest entrant, at least in the for the fast, you know, um, um, burger brands that are operating. And then of course our friends at Five Guys. You don't see In and Out. One of the videos was comparing In and Out to Five Guys. Um, you don't see In and Out here, but they're heavy on the West Coast, and there's a couple of other brands on the West Coast that were pretty good. So there you have the go in fast order. Five Guys almost is more in habit or almost more fast casually of sorts. But then at the bottom, these are the places you go in, you sit. Burger Batch, New Zealand inspired. Jack Brown's down on Libby. Boulevard Burger and Brew, very nostalgic with tattoos. So it's this quirky, very unique position in this space. It's my favorite brand of the ones at the bottom. And then Carytown and Citizen Burger. Seem like those two are pretty similar, in my opinion, maybe even with Jack Brown. So out of those brands down here, my opinion, we could agree to disagree, is Boulevard Burger and Brew and Burger Batch are highly unique and differentiated. So Boulevard Burger and Brew, 10 minutes from campus. Love to meet clients there or, colleagues from the business school. One of us would drive, go there. They got adult milkshakes, they got Pac-Man, and it's just, I just enjoy it. Now, Chris Sway owns it. He also owns Osaka, Wild Ginger, Fat Dragon, Beijing, Red Salt. So he is the holding company is called EAT, EAT. And again, he is a house of brands. So each one of the brands is very unique and different. I feel that if Chris wanted to diversify geographically with Boulevard Burger and Brew, this is the one I think that would resonate with people outside the Richmond area. Even if he had that in the Midlothian area, I think he could handle two of these in the Midlothian area. I think it would do extremely well in Charlottesville. I think it would even do better in Tidewater. And so he's I know him, but he's never asked me to help him strategically. But if he were, I'd say, dude, you got to take this brand and scale it. But he's happy doing the way he does it. So this is what the landscape looks like. So who would be in whose strategic group of sorts. And so you have to look at it in a couple of ways. One, geographically. So here where I sit, I'm almost in Powhatan. I'm 5 minutes from Westchester Commons. Within Westchester Commons, you have a Burger King, you have a Five Guys that are operating in the same shopping center. I've got a Wendy's that is, so these two are 5 minutes from my house. Wendy's is about 10 minutes. Hardee's is about 15 minutes. Sonic is almost across the street from Hardy, 15 minutes. Dairy Queen just opened up, maybe about 6 minutes. And then, of course, I've got two McDonald's as well. And Burger Batch is actually probably 6 minutes. So I've got, and then at Wendy's, so I've got 1, 2, 3 Habits there too, near maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes. All of these guys right here. So in some way, you could say they are all competing against one another, but I would also say that Five Guys, remember, it's about $12. Burger Batch, you go in, they got vodka in there from New Zealand, etc. So in many respects, I ain't going in Burger Batch unless it's a Friday night meal or a Saturday night meal. And I'm willing to drop 40, $50, which, is why I have it right here. You can get in and out of Boulevard Brew a lot cheaper than Burger Batch. So all of a sudden, then it's going to narrow down throughout Burger Batch. Five Guys, right? And these other players that I mentioned to you, these guys are really close. These guys are close. So if it's at lunchtime and I want a burger, it's probably going to be Five Guys. Burger King's okay. I tend to get Burger King or McDonald's purely for the convenience factor. So if I am dying for a diet Coke or Pepsi, doesn't matter, and I'm driving down the Midlothian Turnpike, there is hardly anybody in the drive-through lane with the Burger King. I'm going to go into Burger King because you got to walk into the Five Guys. So they'll get my business purely for a drink every once in a while. Not that often, very rarely in Hardee's because I don't want to wait, takes longer. I haven't been to Sonic in years. Tried out the Dairy Queen, took my little grandson in there. It just opened up for a blizzard. I took him in for a blizzard. He loves Chick-fil-A. He's 3.5. He didn't like the blizzard though, and freaked me out. So I still don't know why he didn't like the blizzard. So see what I'm saying? It's kind of confusing. If Habit operated 5 minutes from me, if they were right with Five Guys and Burger King, I would probably actually go into Habit before Five Guys, as much as I love Five Guys, because I can get in and out of Habit for probably $8. I think something like that versus 12. But I also think Habit's a really good, high quality meal. So anyway, each one of us has our compelling reason why we go into one place versus another. And that's what makes this whole thing around brand and strategy so much fun, figuring that out and how you're going to compete. And so you got the brand right there in the middle, right? Whoever it is. And then you got your strategic group that you're fighting it out with, and then your industry. So my little pure culture consulting firm, you got McKinsey doing what I do, you got Bain, you got Accenture, you got a lot, Boston Consulting, but I ain't competing with those guys. I mean, they're all global firms. They're charging $500,000, $1 million per project, and I'm not anywhere even close to that. I have competed against McKinsey twice, though. I beat them once somehow. I don't have a clue how, other than price, maybe. But my two little competitors, big competitors, are in town. It's a firm called Fortis and Leadership, and another firm called Inner Will. I happen to be really good friends with the CEO for both of those brands, and we tend to pair up a lot. So we'll go against the bigger guys. I'm going to talk about co-opetition a little bit later. And so one of those brands, Tom Epperson, is the CEO. He's a competitor. And yet he asked me to help him doing strategy work. So I'm actually helping a competitor do strategy work. And so that doesn't make sense to a lot of people I know. But he was a friend before he became a competitor. And I was actually doing the strategy work for the firm that owns them, and 10 years ago when the whole idea came up. So this notion of co-opetition what's the intensity of the rivalry is all pretty significant. So you have the pastel, and we say political, economic, social, cultural, technological, ecological, and legal, pastel. These are the driving forces, the external driving forces that you have to consider. So let's spend a little bit of time on each one. Political factors. So basically, this is the government's, and what's going on politically. I mean, this is about lobbying. This is about, contribution, litigation, in political, and the last one will deal with legal, somewhat closely related, but we have become so politicized as a society right now. And, companies have to weigh that. They have to weigh whether or not they're going to step into the political world, and if they do, is there a chance that they're going to alienate folks, our members of our society that don't subscribe to what the company chooses to say or chooses to do. And so the political factors, when you do strategy work, it used to be probably the election is in November of every year. I'm talking about presidential. My clients would tend to start to slow down any strategy work around June. They just want to see who's going to win. Is the Democrat going to win? Is the Republican going to win? Let's just take 4 months off and wait to see. Then it was backing up to around January-ish, February, and now it's just constant. That there's just a constant worry from my clients about who's going to get elected, who's not going to get elected. And so it's a fact of life today when you're running a business. Obviously, in the state of Virginia, cannabis is a very significant issue, and so we now know how the law changed in that regard, and so what are the politics associated with that going forward. One of my friends has been put on the committee that's in charge of looking at the rollout to make it legal by 2024. Economic factors, these are largely macroeconomic, what's going on, nationally, globally even. But you're looking at growth rates, GDP, you're looking at levels of unemployment or employment, you're looking at interest rates, you're looking at inflation or deflation. If you're a global company, you're going to be worrying about currency exchange rates. So these are big issues. And right now, big issue, as I mentioned earlier, supermarkets worrying about the delivery issue and micro fulfillment, and who do you, everybody's tied in with Instacart, but they hate it. They got married, but they want to get a divorce. Supermarkets want a divorce for Instacart, but they don't have an alternative yet. And so the other issue, though, is what's going on with employment levels. There's just a shortage of people to work. We recycle here, and I've been recycling for years, and the recycle trucks haven't picked up my recycling in 5 weeks. And I'm using now my other trash can for my recycling. I just got an email before class, and it ain't going to get resolved anytime soon. So I want to be a good environmentalist and recycle. I got to find out now, where's the recycling station I can take this to. I got to figure out how I'm going to get there. I've got a truck, so I got to put it probably in bags. I got to go through my recycling bin and pull all that stuff out. So, the employment issue is cascading now into my recycle world that I operate in. So let's talk about the really big issue, GDP. Gross domestic product measures the value of economic activity within a country. In every country, at least, unless it's an emerging economy, and they're even still going to have it, has to worry about GDP. China worries about GDP. India worries about GDP. Australia worries about GDP. And so when you think about GDP, particularly as you're relating to the consumption side, there are durable and non-durable goods. Wall Street had another article today just about there's a lot of inflation going on in the durable side of our our world. So that's like automobiles and boats and stuff that's going to be around a while versus non-durable, which is things we're going to buy but we're going to consume pretty quickly. So there's four pieces of the formula for GDP. One is consumption, and consumption is about what you and me and your grandma and your grandpa, your aunt, your uncle, your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, what we're buying on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Consumption tends to be about 70% of GDP. So what that means is if you and I are buying, then, and all of us are buying, then that's really a good thing. And let me tell you something about consumption. Consumption has been driven. This is why I have the baby boomers in front of you. Consumption was driven from the late 40s when they were born up until probably 2008 and 9, 10 years ago, when about 10,000 baby boomers were turning 65 every day. So, but there's multiple issues going on. So the older baby boomers, like my siblings, my oldest brother is almost 15 years older than me. He's been retired for a bunch of years. He got out of his country club membership, no dog now. So they've scaled back. The number two brother, he had a second home, sold that when he retired. He had two dogs, now he's just got one dog. So both of those two, and then the third brother, oldest, scaled back. Then my sister followed all of them 5 years later. So I'm the younger side of the baby boom generation. Here's what's going on right now. The younger baby boomers, my side of the baby boom, coupled with Gen Xers, and that was a smaller cohort, coupled with the top third of the millennials who are now turning 40. These three cohorts have come together and are driving a lot of our growth. Now, you might have money in your pocket, you're buying at Kroger, you're getting your iPhone, you're spending money, no question about it. But the older millennials, and the millennial is a cohort, is bigger than the baby boomers. So the older millennials, the Gen Xers, and the younger baby boomers are driving our consumption. And it is red hot, maybe even white hot right now. And part of our supply chain is we can't keep up with consumption. We just can't. And so whether it's home prices or automobiles or whatever, we can't keep up. So that's consumption. The second piece is this investment stuff. This is business investing. So I was down at school today, and as I was driving, I just started looking around to see how many cranes I could see. When you go to visit a city, if you see a lot of cranes that are scattered about the city, that means there's a lot of business investment going on in the city. Business investment is Wegmans deciding to come to Richmond and building 2 stores. Business investment is VCU deciding to build a new building on Gray Street. Business investment is a company deciding to buy a great deal of hardware, technology hardware for their company. And businesses invest. And in some cases, you're not going to get a return on that investment if you're a business. If your store needs new HVAC, it's going to be $500,000. You just got to get it, and you're not going to get a return on that. But for the most part, if you're putting in an investment, infrastructure investment, you want to get your money back. And then plus government spending. So the government spends every year. If consumption scales back because of recession, businesses get afraid to invest. So those two, big part of GDP scale back, that's when the government will stimulate the economy. And so what we see happening is um, the consumption piece plus investment plus government spending is going to be key drivers for GDP. The last piece is a tricky one. This is the difference between what we export as a country versus what we import. So many of you, I'm sure, have an iPhone right now sitting, next to your computer. The iPhone was put together by a company called Foxconn, and Foxconn's in China, and then it's sent back to the US, and that's sent back as an import. Even though it's designed by Apple in Cupertino, California, it is considered an import. So we have been operating with a deficit for a number of years, ever since we started outsourcing manufacturing overseas to China, to India, to Vietnam, to Thailand, wherever, Mexico, et cetera. Anything coming in is considered an import. And we've been importing a lot more than we've been exporting. And so, I think, as I've told you before, I'm very moderate politically. So this is certainly not a political statement. But when Trump was going after tariffs, what he was trying to do is force China to loosen up its stranglehold, and to help the United States do a better job with this part of the GDP. When Trump gave companies a tax break, he was hoping they'd take that dollars and invest it back into growth. What happened is companies took the money and they bought their stock back. And I'm generalizing, but that's essentially what happened. When we got a break in our tax in consumers, we used it to pay down debt for the most part. Some of us went out and spent it like crazy, went to Vegas or whatever. But for the most part, a lot of people got the check and used it to try to pay down some credit card debt, et cetera. So this is GDP: consumption, investment, government spending, plus the net difference between exports and imports equals GDP. And again, consumption is a big piece of that. These guys right here were driving the economy for years, and now they are not, and they don't like it. They're being a pain in the butt in many respects, because millennials are really taking control in just about every aspect, and a lot of the older baby boomers don't like it. So I took a snapshot from the Wall Street Journal for second quarter 2009 before COVID. And I love this because it just really speaks to the whole formula that we were just talking about. So when Obama was president, we were running about a 2.1, 2.2 GDP. Wasn't setting the world on fire, but it was okay. And we were doing pretty good. And so what we're running right now is, we're running well above that. And it's white hot. And as a result, supply chains can't keep up. There's a shortage of help. And as a result, we are in a fairly stressed out economy. And if we were running back down at a 1.5 or 2% growth GDP, we would not be feeling what we're feeling right now. So there's a trade-off. The stock market, it went down, this past week, I think, but the stock market has been kicking butt. It's been doing really, really well. And so the baby boomers who already retired or are getting ready to retire, their nest egg, their 401ks, their investments have been doing really well. What's interesting is that I don't know how old your moms and dads are, but if they're, if you're in your early 20s, for the most part, I know we have some in their 30s in class, but let's just, they're probably right around 50-ish, something like that. So they're Gen Xers to a certain degree, or maybe cuspers, but their parents are in their late 70s and 80s, and they've accumulated overall, this is not the case for everyone, a lot of wealth. So when those people die, that wealth is going to be passed on to your moms and dads, and maybe even to you. So there's going to be a huge cascading of wealth from the baby boom generation over the next 10 to 15 years that's going to drive growth. So you guys will start getting into your jobs. The millennials will get into their prime earning years. The youngest baby boomers will still hang around for a few more years, then they'll go into retirement. I'm just bullish as long as we don't blow each other up, it's a world and stuff. I'm really bullish on the future. Here's another way of looking at it. The US economy, so this goes back to 1990. Remember, I said there was a 1990, 1991 recession. On the far left, this is when Walmart just kicked butt. And they said, we're going to, wow, we're making money selling jeans and footballs and bicycles. And I wonder if we can make money selling food the way we sell all this other stuff. So yes, we're going to do that. So they decided to diversify into food and grocery. And they said they're going to be the nation's largest food retailer by year 2000. And guess what? They did. And so when we get into Walmart heavier in the semester, diversification, 60% of revenue for every Walmart store right now is from grocery. They made such a great decision, but they came into Richmond, they attacked companies like Ukrops, Food Line, et cetera, and then we had to figure out how we're going to respond. So look at this period of time from around 1991-ish, right here. Then we had a blip right here. We had a period of negative growth. This is right around 9/11, interestingly. And then we came back up, and you could just see we started going down. We started accumulating too much debt right around here. People started buying 2 homes, 3 homes, no money down. And so you can just start to see how we started to go down, and we did well after 9/11. We just started with our economy weakened. Then we got into the big recession, 2008, and this was the Obama, about 2.1. So you see the difference. This was Clinton, and so this was, Bush was right around here, and then this was Obama, right? And then he was elected, and Trump came in, and we started going up a little bit. He started focusing in on GDP, and of course, trying to stimulate it above here. But again, not a political statement. But when Trump said he wanted to make America great again, he wanted to go back here. His focus was on GDP, guys, not on social justice stuff and other related issues. Here's a broader way of looking at GDP. This was the 91 recession. Walmart going to be the nation's largest food retailer. This is right around 9/11. When 9/11 hit, guys, everybody scaled back. We didn't know what was going on. I mean, I was the head of operations at Ukrops. We didn't travel. We were just looking over our shoulder. We were worrying about terrorism. One day a package of flour opened up, and in one of our stores, and we had to bring in the hazmat group because we didn't know if it was some chemical, biological weapon. I mean, and I'm serious with that. And it was pretty crazy what was going on right around then. Then we was able to jack it back up, and then 2008, and we had some negative stuff. Boom, COVID right there. Crazy. And then this was stimulation, government stimulated. We all scaled back, businesses stopped. What's interesting is companies were worrying about another recession before 2020. And they were asking me, my clients, hey, what are your other clients saying? I go, I don't know when a recession's coming, I would say, but everybody's thinking 2020. And so almost, it was crazy that everybody thought a recession was coming in 2020. And it did, but it didn't come because of financial underpinnings weakened like it did in 2008. 2008, the recession came in because we were over levered. And so it was COVID. And so, of course, now we're seeing some pretty high growth rates. And I'll never say you hate for us to stop growing right now, but we are stressing ourselves out pretty big time. And in COVID now with Delta, It's obviously, I mean, I flew all summer and I flew again last week. And I can tell you, I could not believe how few people were at the airport and up in Boston, Richmond and Boston Airport. So it's having an effect in many respects. Stock market is reacting, they're taking profit, and they're trying to figure out what's next. How is this going to sort through? So we look at global GDP, we look at India, and we look at China. Here's the US, here's the European Union, here's the world collectively. Australia has done well, New Zealand has done well. So what our former president freaked out when he saw this and said, why are we here and India and China are here? And that was part of his impetus for starting a trade war with China. And he almost did with Mexico, but and maybe a little bit there, but didn't really get it going. So you see that when we look at comparing ourselves to China and India, not too good. The rest of the Europe, okay. The rest of the world, which includes all this, not as good. So that was a motivation in that part. So our former president this GDP was his former, his primary key performance metric of sorts. So the Great Reset. This was in 2008, a great book by Richard Florida. And he went back and studied, he studied all these big economic upheavals, and what he came to the conclusion is there's certain stages when we come out of this stuff. Crisis sets in, business consumers cut back because they're worried, they're uncertain. Then we're in the valley of despair, new innovations and business models. So if you think about 2008, this is when Tesla, in that period of time, I mean, 9, 10, 11, 12, Tesla, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, a lot of innovation came out. And what happened was Uber, merged its smartphone with the taxi industry of sorts to create this opportunity for it. So there's no way Lyft could have existed unless we had smartphones. And so smartphones came about with BlackBerry in the late 90s. And then Apple came out, Android and Apple came out right around the same time. And that was around 2008-ish, right? And then apps came out. And so then it was shortly thereafter where Uber said, hey, let's use an app on the iPhone. Taxi industry needs to be disrupted, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happened though, guys, is we got stuck on investment. If you think about Flint, Michigan, with the water problem, we got bridge issues, we got road issues, we got tunnel issues, we got water treatment plants, sewage. I mean, we got lots of infrastructure that needs to be improved, but politically we couldn't decide on anything. But we've just at least passed a piece of the pie. Democrats want to come back with something more. We'll see if they're able to do it. And there's been some green energy, so energy, transportation, communications is a big issue. And then your new economic landscape. So I don't know how this is all going to play out since we've had this major reset with COVID as well. So since 2008, 13 years later, we've had 2 tidal waves of economic impact. It's created a lot of debt for us as a country. So, when I say that our future is bright, I still believe that. We got to figure out how to deal with this debt though. So the S part of Pastel, social cultural factors, you got cult norms, values constantly in flux. Sometimes it differs across groups. We had the Black Lives Matter movement last summer. A lot of CEOs made a lot of promises last summer. We'll see how that plays out. I had you watch a podcast or listen to a podcast on Ben and Jerry's. These dudes are getting arrested protesting. Social justice is a big part of their positioning, their brand. We talked about upper echelon theory. in strategic leadership. But it's interesting. My MBA students studied Ben and Jerry's, and they found that as amazing as the brand is publicly for supporting social justice issue, the brand up in Vermont has very few people of color working for them. And so this is something that Ben and Jerry's has got to figure out. The notion, well, we're up in Vermont, yeah, whatever. I mean, they got to figure it out. So I think people give them the benefit of the doubt, but this is something that they're going to have to deal with, and other organizations are as well. So it's not going away, and many of my clients and other organizations are working their way through to try to become a better inclusive, diverse organization. And there are consultants who've jumped in and they're specializing in this area. So I have partnered up with a group who this is what they do, and so we're working with one of my clients on navigating this very important issue. Demographic trends, this is age, gender, family size, the necessity, sexual orientation, all this stuff. These are all social, cultural, and organizations have to decide which are opportunities for them, and in some cases they might be threats. Technological factors, new products, processes. There's a new thermometer coming out, and the thermometer is a smart thermometer, and it goes into your ear, and it takes your temperature, and it uploads it to the cloud, and this company can monitor literally, it's not the true definition of a heat map, but it's a heat map, and it can see where temperature outbreaks are occurring. That's the type of innovation. It's called Kinsa, I think it is. That's the type of innovation that's going to be emerging over the next few years. I think with Apple moving more and more into health, particularly with its its Apple Watch, that it's going to have an app that's going to be a thermometer. You wake up, whether you think of temperature, do you even have a thermometer in your house or your apartment? I think what'll happen is, if it isn't going to be part of 13, Apple's going to have to do it where you just point the phone at your head and it takes your temperature and then it uploads. You're going to have your own health account in the cloud at some point. And I think Apple's going to be on the forefront of that. So we're going to see all this innovation coming out in the next several years, particularly around health. I think it was occurring before COVID, but COVID is accelerating. You've heard that from other professors that COVID was an accelerator. It's moving us faster to online food shopping than we would have otherwise. And then, of course, environmental factors, earthquakes, hurricanes, global warming, all these issues are out there and have an implication for us. So, what's the implication for zero emission, for trucks, airplanes, clean energy, all these things? I was traveling, visiting my daughter in LA. We went to the high desert Joshua Tree and one of her friends' Airbnb, and we just hung out there, and I watched coyotes and roadrunners for a few days. It was a lot of fun. 115 degrees. It was crazy hot. But I went through Riverside, California, and then beyond that, there are thousands of these things. Wind farm. So wind farm with thousands of windmills or whatever they're called. So all this issues going forward, then legal laws, mandates, regulations, like the minimum wage law that got everybody all crazed out. But now with this shortage of employees, companies already gotten to $15 an hour. And so, what's going on with the Supreme Court decisions, et cetera. So companies have to figure this out. Where are we going to go? How are we going to position ourselves going forward? These four guys, of course, he's now out. He retired or stepping back. But Tim Cook and Zuckerberg, he's the Sadella, he's the Microsoft CEO, has done a fantastic job. But they're all under investigation by the federal government, and were before even Biden came in. Do they have too much control? Do they have too much power? Remember, supplier power, FTC, federal government. tries to keep companies from having too much power. And so we'll see where they end up. Microsoft had a problem about 20 plus years ago, and the federal government came in and just about sucked every bit of innovation going on at Microsoft. And I don't know if you remember, they bought Skype and literally did nothing with Skype. And now Skype is more like Microsoft Teams, which I consider to be of all of the, WebEx, Zoom, even Google Meets. I feel like Microsoft Teams is the worst user interface. It's, again, my humble opinion. So all these issues, these external issues, guys, it's driving forces, it's the economy, new entrants, thinking differently. You got to have a sense of not intense paranoia, but you got to be looking over your shoulder. You got to be looking at trends. You got to be anticipating rapids ahead. If you've ever been whitewater rafting, it's class 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've been having class 6 rapids thrown at us constantly, left and right. And a strategic leader, the captain of the boat, he or she has got to keep their direct reports, the chief marketing officer, the chief financial officer, chief operating officer, chief technology officer, chief environmental officer, whatever, from falling out of the boat. I mean, that's the reality. And all these are driving forces. So when you think Lowe's, which of these is having an effect on Lowe's? And when you get assigned your brands, which of those are affecting your brand? So where are we then? When we think about COVID, when we first entered into COVID, this is where we were. We couldn't see a thing. It's like going over Afton Mountain, and you're just hanging on, you're stressed out, you don't know what the implication is going to be. We're certainly not over here for level 1. We're pretty much here. You can see it's hazy, but you can still see clear enough to make some decisions. And so, but I don't know if we'll ever get clear like this, where we were back in the 90s. I think my opinion is we're going to just learn how to operate with a level of uncertainty going forward. With a global world, that is a reality. Back in the 90s, we were doing some global stuff, but that didn't really kick in until China joined the World Trade Organization in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then India came in. So we have these growing countries. Africa is next in terms of the emerging markets, and that's where the General Electrics are right now, the Halliburton and those other firms. So this is Porter's 5 forces model. And the 5 forces model can be looked at, of course, as these forces occurring in the environment. What's the likelihood that you're going to have a new entrant jumping in? Craft beer back in 2010, very high likelihood. I don't think we've had a craft beer brand jump into the Richmond market in the past 4 years, 5 years. But 2009 and 10, man, they were popping up left and right. But it's now saturated, and the big consumers of craft beer are now, worrying a little bit about the weight they were gaining, starting to focus on their calorie consumption. So the beer companies, the craft beer companies are still trying to be very aggressive, but it's not the way it was in terms of new entrants. You can pick, you've got power in terms of the craft beer, because you can pick whoever you like. You can go with Vail, you can go with Stone, you can go Licking Hole Creek, whoever. You've got power with that supplier, or the companies that are providing the beer companies with the hops and the water or whatever they use, the formulas, the recipes, etc. And then the threat of substitution is very high. You can say, I don't want a craft beer today, I want wine, or I want spirits. And so you look at the spirit companies in terms of whether it's vodka or gin or even moonshine. More and more companies are entering into that space right now. So I think if you were looking at spirits right now, particularly in gin, my trip up to Boston, I could not believe the amount of new startup gin companies. that are up there. So rather interesting in that regard. So this is five forces, guys. So whether it's the burger industry, whether it's the craft beer industry, whether it's the airline industry, we've just seen a new airline jump in, right? Breeze is now flying or will be flying direct from Richmond to Charleston. Charleston is a pain in the butt to get to flying. And so the guy who founded JetBlue has now founded a new company, and he's jumping in. So every industry needs to be examined using this model, and you need to assign, is it a high, medium, or low to each one of these, and it's pretty much to determine if you're diversifying, do we want to jump in? So Anheuser-Busch AB InBev made a decision because its traditional beer category was going into the negative growth. It wanted to hop into the craft beer industry. So they bought Devil's Backbone, and they bought other beer brands as well, craft beer brands. And then the five forces model, the way it works is identify the specific factors, analyze the strength of each force, and to what extent is it shaping the industry's attractiveness, and then estimate the overall strength of the combined forces to determine the general attractiveness of the industry, including potential for profit. So with similar to that, you have this notion of industry conversion. So you look at the comic book industry, right? Marvel, and Marvel gets bought by Disney, and then you have Marvel Studios, and then Marvel comic books start these blockbuster movies, and you have Scarlett Johansson's now suing Disney because Disney got into streaming video, and they decided to release the Black Widow out on their streaming video at the same time that the movie was released in movie theaters. Scarlett's salary was predicated primarily on movie theater ticket sales. And so by Disney doing that, she said it was a breach of contract. And there's a big lawsuit going on right now. She's taken the heat, but I can tell you this, every actress in Hollywood right now is going at a girl, and we'll see what happens with it. She has supplier power. This is probably going to be her last Marvel anyway. So she didn't have that much to lose in that regard. But it's really interesting to see how this is going to play out as we start to see movies going more and more online. They're converging in that regard. And so, the consumer research suggests 78% of all US households have a subscription streaming service. So I have Netflix, I have Amazon, I have Hulu, but I don't have Disney and I don't have Apple. But if I get a new iPhone, I have a Pixel that I'm very unhappy with right now. The phone broke, but if I get an iPhone coming up in the next couple of weeks, I think I get a free Disney or Apple subscription. So I had mentioned earlier this notion of co-opetition. You go home tonight now, you say, God, I want to watch a Netflix show. One reason you can watch Netflix is Amazon allows you to. So this is called co-opetition. Co-opetition is where you have competitors who also cooperate. So even though these guys are fighting it out, and we have a video for you about Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix. These guys coexist. They have to coexist, and that's co-opetition. We'll talk more about this topic when we get to strategic alliances. So, industry. Netflix for early mover, first mover. Amazon Prime jumped in. Hulu was a crazy combination of Fox, ABC, NBC joined to create Hulu. Disney's now taking control of that alliance, and all of a sudden Paramount's jumping in, Disney's jumping in, Apple's jumping in. And so Porter's five forces model is a way for companies to think about the earning potential if they jump in. So crazy, Disney has jumped in, but they also own Hulu. So Disney is actually operating two separate streaming brands, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next couple of years. So this guy jumps in. We know that their audio streaming is not a big moneymaker for them. He made the decision that enough profit needs to go to the content creator. That was because of a couple of big, huge movie, or I'm sorry, music stars, Taylor Swift for one, challenged Apple, similar to the way Scarlett Johansson is challenging Disney. And Tim Cook and team made the decision to take less margin. And so what's going to happen with the Apple streaming service, their video? I can tell you this right now, to be a writer in Hollywood, screenwriter, this is the best time to enter into that space. So streaming video, why would you want to go in? And so when you decide to go in, there's certain entry choices that you have to consider. You know, what type of entry, you know, what are you going to leverage, where, who, what are the players, the incumbents, when are you going to do it, and then how are you going to do it? So Apple has been incredibly deliberate. Apple is not a first mover. Apple is, I would say, the great majority of the time, going to be a relatively fast follower. They let Samsung go out with a watch, looked at what Samsung did great with, and then they did their own watch. They weren't first with the tablet. They certainly weren't first with a portable music device. They weren't first with the phone. But what they do is they look to determine how can they make that product better. And that's what Apple has been great at, transforming an industry into a better, a better device. So you have commitments, bets being made, they're costly, they're long-term. Again, you think about General Motors, billions, 5, 6, 7 billion moving into the electric space, then eventually autonomous space. And, it's pretty crazy in terms of these bets being made, and they're all coming together to form alliances. And so, when you think about the future, and in module 2, we talked about scenario planning. Have you ever really wondered about the future where autonomous cars dominate the roads and how this will impact your life? So 14 years from now, the fleet, our national fleet, will be primarily electric, with a smaller percentage being autonomous. And so 14 years from now, my kids might be worried about me going over for Thanksgiving dinner. So they send their car, and I go hobbling out of my house and get into the car and sit back like these two and turn on music, or, watch a little movie on my way over to their house, and their car takes me to their house, and then takes me back home, and then comes back later on. And it's fully autonomous, it's electric. And so, this is the future. So companies are trying to figure this out. What's the implication for electric and autonomous for the convenience store industry? These big scenarios. What's the implication if you're Geico or Progressive or State Farm for the autonomous industry? What's Advance Auto going to do? What's Napa going to do? These are the big strategic decisions that companies are trying to figure out as we go forward. And part of the challenge is what are we as an economy going to do? And so this is, to me, why it's a very exciting time to be in your position. You're just starting your career. I've got about another 9 years to go, knock on wood, as long as I'm staying healthy and I can stay relevant for you. And that's the question. And so this course is examining these issues. So today was about looking at the external environment. On Wednesday, we're going to take a deep dive into the internal environment, because Apple has never been into streaming video before, and they didn't buy a company that had been doing it. They decided to do it themselves. And making movies and weekly shows is very different than making an iPhone or a smartphone or a watch or a tablet. So they had to figure out what their capabilities were, what are their competencies to be able to do that. And that's what we'll be talking about on Wednesday. Looking forward to it.